If you are studying for the IELTS exam right now, or preparing a university application for Canada, the UK, or Australia, I want you to listen to this very carefully. In 2013, 74% of young adults globally believed that a university education was very important. By 2025, that figure had plummeted to just 35%. Think about that for a second. In just over a decade, trust in the single most important institution for global social mobility fell by more than half.
And that drop isn't some random cultural mood swing, Sarina. It is a highly rational reaction to a system that has fundamentally broken its promises. The cost of a bachelor's degree in the West has doubled in the last 20 years, while aggregate student debt is pushing $2 trillion. Young people are looking at the price tag, looking at the job market, and realizing they are being asked to buy a ticket for a train that isn't actually arriving.
But is the train really stalled? Or have we simply changed where the tracks go?
Well, if you look at the recent data from the Lumina Foundation and Gallup, the tracks seem to lead straight into a wall. They surveyed 2,000 employers, and the results expose a massive structural contradiction. On one hand, nearly half of all organizations say most jobs require a degree to be successful, and 75% admit they actively prefer candidates with a degree even when the role doesn't formally require one. But on the other hand, only 54% of those same employers believe universities are actually graduating students with the skills their businesses need. In fact, nearly 70% say recent graduates need a moderate or great deal of additional training just to function.
That is what researchers are now calling a signaling crisis. And if you are navigating this system from outside the West, this concept is absolutely vital to understand. In simple terms, a signaling crisis occurs when a credential, like a university diploma or even a language test score, stops representing actual practical capability and becomes a mere sorting device.
Right. It's the difference between knowing how to do something and having a piece of paper that says you can do it. For decades, Western culture sold us what the New Yorker calls the gospel of higher education. The idea that university is this sacred space for intellectual exploration, self-discovery, and reading the classics. But the reality is much more transactional. As the economist Brian Kaplan famously argued, the primary function of education is not actually skill building. It is to certify employability. It proves to an employer that you can sit still, follow instructions, and conform to an institutional hierarchy for 4 years. It's about signaling, not substance.
All right, I hear your point, Marcus, but I think that perspective is highly cynical, and it completely ignores the lived reality of millions of international applicants. If you are a student in Mumbai, Lagos, or Istanbul, you do not have the luxury of dismissing the degree as a mere conforming signal. For these applicants, the Western university degree is a translation device.
A translation device? How so?
Think about it. If you have a degree from a local college that Western employers have never heard of, your resume is often automatically filtered out by an algorithm before a human being ever sees it. But if you have a degree from a recognized institution in London, Toronto, or Sydney, your value is instantly translated into a currency those employers trust. It provides a baseline of credibility. A concrete example of this is a student of mine, a brilliant clinical pharmacist from Syria. Back in Damascus, he ran an entire hospital department. But when he arrived in Canada, his credentials weren't recognized. He was told that to practice, he would have to retake a 4-year Canadian degree from scratch. Today, he is driving an Uber in Toronto. He has all the substance, all the skills. But because he lacks the local status signal, he is functionally invisible to the system.
That is a heartbreaking story, Sarina, but it actually proves my point. The fact that a highly qualified Syrian pharmacist is forced to drive a taxi because he lacks a local Canadian stamp of approval shows that the system is not interested in skill. It is interested in gatekeeping. And that gatekeeping is incredibly expensive. We are living in a credentialing economy, where the barrier to entry for professional life is constantly being raised. Not because the jobs are getting harder, but because employers are outsourcing their vetting process to universities. They are using the degree as a risk reduction tool, and they are forcing the student to pay the $80,000 premium for it.
But if you don't pay that premium, what is the alternative? How else does an outsider prove their capability in a foreign market?
Well, the market is already trying to route around this. If you look at job search platforms like Indeed, over 52% of professional job postings now do not list any formal educational requirement. They are trying to shift toward skills-based hiring. But the problem is that this is often just cosmetic reform. Employers put no degree required on the job description to look progressive. But when the applications come in, their human resources departments still filter for degrees to save time.
Exactly. It is cosmetic. And that is why I get so frustrated when people tell young, global applicants to just skip college and build a portfolio. For an ambitious 15-year-old with a wealthy family in New York, sure, maybe they can start a Twitch stream or build a software portfolio and get hired through their network. But if you are applying for a visa or a professional license from a non-Western country, you are completely bound by institutional rules. You cannot get immigration points for a portfolio. You get points for a degree.
Yes, but we have to be honest about the cost of those points. Look at the Indeed data on generational attitudes. Over 51% of Gen Z graduates say they regret their degree, compared to only 20% of baby boomers. And 38% of all college-educated workers say their student loans have limited their career growth more than their diploma actually accelerated it. Think about the irony of that. The very tool that was sold as an economic accelerator has become a financial anchor. It's what I call an unstable price-to-signal ratio. The price of the signal keeps rising, but the purchasing power of that signal in the job market is falling every day.
I'm not sure those two things are actually opposites, Marcus. A tool can be both an anchor and a key. And this is where I think your analysis presents a false binary. You are framing this as if the degree is either a golden ticket or a complete scam.
It certainly feels like a scam when you're paying off $80,000 of debt while working an entry-level retail job.
But that is a category error. You are conflating the flaws of the funding model with the inherent value of the education. When you tell a student in a developing country that university is a scam, you aren't liberating them. You are shutting down the only path to structural mobility they have. You are advising them to stand outside the gate and hope for a miracle, while the children of the elite continue to pay the toll and walk right through. The data from the New Yorker actually suggests that as smaller, less prestigious colleges close down, we are heading toward a winner-takes-all scenario.
A winner-takes-all scenario? Meaning only the elite brands survive?
Precisely. The Ivy League and top-tier state universities will be completely fine because their reputational signal is ironclad. But the regional colleges, the ones that traditionally serve working class and immigrant communities, will collapse. If we abandon the system instead of reforming it, we aren't ending gatekeeping. We are just ensuring that only the wealthiest people can afford the gate.
But Sarina, look at how AI is changing the actual nature of the work. If 45% of Gen Z students believe that AI has already made their degrees irrelevant, they aren't just being dramatic. They are looking at the skills they are being taught: basic data analysis, routine programming, templated writing, and realizing a chatbot can do those tasks in 3 seconds for zero cost. The university curriculum is moving at a snail's pace, while technological disruption is moving at light speed.
But that is where the distinction between an amplifier and a replacement becomes crucial. As the career experts at Indeed pointed out, AI is an amplifier, not a pink slip. It is going to eliminate the routine, rote tasks, yes, but it is going to reward those who have a deep foundational education, those who know how to ask the right questions, synthesize complex ideas, and think critically.
That sounds incredibly noble, but it also sounds performatively cynical. It's the kind of high-minded defense that university administrators use to justify their tuition fees, while their students are using ChatGPT to write the very essays those administrators are grading. The New Yorker article noted that the vast majority of students at elite colleges are already using AI for nearly all of their coursework. So what are we actually certifying here? What is the signal? Is it intelligence? Or is it just the ability to prompt a machine to look intelligent?
Wait, that is a massive generalization. You are assuming that because students use technology, no learning is taking place. That framing is far too simple. Yes, the traditional pedagogy, the way we teach and test, has to change. We cannot just ask students to write 5-paragraph essays anymore. But that does not mean the classroom experience, the physical reality of sitting with a professor and debating misshapen ideas with other human beings, is obsolete.
But on whose dime, Sarina? On whose dime? If that human experience costs $40,000 a year, and only the wealthy can afford to treat university as a finishing school for self-discovery, then we have to stop calling it a public good. It is a private luxury brand, and we should have the intellectual honesty to describe it as such.
All right, I will give you that. The commercialization of higher education is a profound betrayal of its original promise. The gospel of university as a default path for everyone is dead. We cannot, in good conscience, tell every young person that university is always the right choice regardless of price, major, or personal circumstances.
That is a massive concession from you.
It is an honest one, but I need you to make an equal concession. If the universal gospel is dead, we cannot replace it with a universal cynicism that tells vulnerable applicants to stay home. We must teach them how to be strategic. They need to look at the price-to-signal ratio of their specific major in their specific country and make a calculated business decision.
I can agree with that. The degree is no longer a temple of truth, and it is no longer a guaranteed escalator. It is a calculated, strategic financial transaction, and the students who succeed in this new environment will be the ones who treat it as such.
And that, I think, is where we find our alignment. The degree has lost its monopoly on meaning. It is no longer the finish line. It is simply a very expensive, highly regulated starting block. Once you are out of the starting blocks, you are immediately responsible for upgrading your toolkit on your own.
And by the way, if you've been hearing the phrase signaling crisis used a lot in the media recently, this dynamic is exactly why. In professional discussions, when people talk about a signaling crisis, they mean a situation where the traditional credentials no longer reliably communicate actual competence to employers. It is an incredibly sophisticated phrase to use in your IELTS Speaking Part 3, especially when you are asked about the future of employment or education.
It shows you can move past generic textbook vocabulary and analyze structural trends like a native speaker.
Which is exactly what we are here to help you do.
We will see you next week.